Yo, what's up, YouTube? This is my first video, and I'm finna react to how to beat Art the Clown in Terrifier 3. I never watched Terrifier 3. I watched 1 and some of 2, but I never watched 3. BRB and Adland. Alright, Mr. Roy. And if you don't know, I'm gonna stream every weekend on Twitch at just T148. Just to let you know.
Dead to seek revenge against you. Diabolical clown with inhuman strength came back from the dead to seek revenge against you and your family. What would you do? Christmas came early, only this time around, it won't be Jolly Saint Nick who's dishing out the holiday cheer. No, there's a new fat man in town, and the toys in his bag are a whole lot more exciting. However, these aren't your typical random acts of kindness that you would normally expect this time of year. Turns out the imposter clause only brought the naughty list, and unbeknownst to our heroes, he put their names right at the top. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat Art the Clown in Terrifier 3. Art is still alive. Sure, his head is missing, and it seems he's down a few pints following the recent showdown with Sienna and company. But, as the saying goes, there ain't no rest for the wicked. And that's really bad news for the lone police officer who just walked in.
I took two things that I love, dancing and dogs, and I made them into a successful business.
On this nightmare. Now, it's not like the dispatch could have expected this place was occupied by an unkillable circus freak that feeds off of human suffering. But, based on the officer's comms, they at least had reports of a dangerous lunatic who was very likely to be armed. Knowing this, there's absolutely no reason a single uniform with nothing but a pistol should be checking this out on his own. After all, the 911 call likely came from Sienna and Jonathan following their escape, since there was no one left alive who even knew that they were there. And with no mention of hostages or people in need of medical, there doesn't seem to be a cause for this level of urgency. Besides, even in the case where someone needs rescuing, responding officers will still often wait for backup to arrive if there's a potential threat actor present. Although, it really depends on the agency and the circumstances. Either way, all that's likely to happen here is the suspect slipping out the back while there's no one watching the perimeter. And that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario goes something like this. Yes, it seems the headless strangler was unaffected by gunfire. Who could have guessed? Alright, snide comments aside, it's commendable that the officer was able to fall to the level of his training and put multiple shots center mass. Unfortunately, given the freak can survive without a brain, blowing out his harder spine's unlikely to make much of a difference. And while I recognize it would be extremely difficult to think straight in this situation, the fact is, there's plenty more rounds in that Glock mag, and I'm not going out until I fire every last one. Looking at Art's current condition, there's a few logical conclusions we can draw from the officer's perspective. The first is that he seemingly can't be killed. At least, not by conventional means. However, we don't necessarily have to kill him to get away from him. So all that matters to us right now is that he can be damaged. I mean, the dude's head was clearly severed from his body, so why couldn't the same be done to his arms? With that in mind, I would try targeting his forearms and elbows to destroy as much tissue as possible. Contrary to some of the FUD lore out there, 9x19 Parabellum can shatter bones, and it can easily shred through the various muscle groups used in contracting the fingers. Without the use of those, our script should weaken to the point where we can break free.
Then I'm looking like, oh shit, he got no head. Then like,
body doesn't work the same way that ours does. So victory's far from guaranteed here. But assuming that we're able to blast our way out of the chokehold, our next move will be to quickly, but also carefully, run like hell back to our police cruiser. Remember, we're in a literal funhouse right now, so it would be pretty easy to make a single wrong turn that gets us hopelessly lost. That said, there would almost certainly have to be emergency exits scattered throughout this dump for it to have ever been allowed to operate in the first place. So we'll definitely want to keep our eyes peeled for any signage pointing to a way out. Of course, this all hinges on the question of whether we can even get away from Art in the first place. And considering in the past we've seen him casually rip people apart with his bare hands, I'd have my doubts. Still, the golden rule is always try until you die. And if there's any way someone could get out of this situation, that would probably be it. Sadly, it seems our buddy in blue couldn't quite piece it all together before losing consciousness, which is why we currently see Art hopping on the subway while wearing the man's severed head. As for where he's going, it turns out he's kind of already there. You see, over at the local loony bin, one of Art's few surviving victims, Victoria, basically just experienced her own sick and twisted form of immaculate conception. Guess she's lucky he only lost his head. Anyway, it appears the sight of a horribly disfigured mental patient birthing a fully formed human head was simply too much for the responding orderly to handle, leaving her unable to do more than let out a single scream before getting pounced on. This results in one of her colleagues coming to investigate the disturbance, and he pretty much does the exact same thing, albeit from much further away. Still, it shouldn't have mattered where they were standing when they noticed this fever dream, because either one of them could have easily solved the problem by simply shutting and locking the door leading to Victoria's cell. Well, almost. There's still the matter of Art's remote-controlled corpse coming in for visitation, and without access to weapons, just about the only thing our guy can do is make a run for it or try to lock himself inside an empty cell. Of course, knowing what we know about old Ronald McDeadly, he would probably just come back around with a couple gas cans and cook us alive in there. So, I'm leaning more towards option A. Regardless, the orderly has options, but instead he just freezes up and leaves himself wide open for the double team.
Bro, who wouldn't freeze if you see a woman give birth to a literal clown head and her face missing? Nigga, I'm just like, oh. I'm being so shocked because, like, no way it's real. This just gotta be fake. It just gotta be fake. I'm just like, oh.
Which is definitely not what you want to see. That said, this absolute failure of security isn't entirely his fault. First of all, state mental hospitals responsible for housing violent offenders like Victoria are generally run in a manner similar to prisons, meaning that any random headless clown on the street couldn't simply walk in through the front door whenever they pleased. Also, based on the male orderly's call for backup, there were only 3 total staff members on duty at the time of the incident, and that's including the female orderly that got herself chomped on right off the bat. Now, from what I found online, this would make the hospital grossly understaffed, as at least in 2021, there were some 634 security officers spread across the 25 state psychiatric facilities throughout New York, which is where this mess takes place.
Not everybody cares about quality. Some people just want credit. If that's you, every month they fill your cart with suggestions from small
place. Granted, this pool of available bodies wouldn't be distributed evenly, since the larger facilities in more populous areas would require greater manpower. But judging by the distinct lack of New York State Office of Mental Health uniforms, this place doesn't appear to have any. You're telling me that HQ couldn't even spare 6 officers to split into 8-hour shifts? I'm not saying it would be an absolute game changer given their lack of firearms, but they'd at least have collapsible steel batons that they could.
Terrifier. Excuse my spelling. Did I spell that shit right? 3 cast. That was another movie. I don't know who the hell these people. Wait, this name look familiar. So that wasn't Leonardo DiCaprio. Oh. I mean, it was him. It was just a different movie. Oh. All right, back to reaction. My fault, getting sidetracked.
Could use the bust of Victoria's head open and buy themselves a little distance. Furthermore, we've seen in the past that Art prefers to single his marks out as much as possible, so having a few extra pairs of hands around could have deterred him from making a frontal assault. At any rate, Having been properly reassembled, the murder mime triumphantly emerges from the mental hospital alongside his new partner in crime. From there, the pair make their way back to Art's dilapidated hideout, where Victoria settles into a nice relaxing bath. It's here that they'll wait and wait and wait for 5 whole years, until at long last, their slumbers disturbed by an unsuspecting work crew coming in to tear the place down. As you might expect, walking into the lion's den completely unarmed is not conducive to long-term survival. However, these guys could have easily had a chance to escape without injury after discovering Victoria's desiccated remains stewing in a tub of her own decomp fluid. I mean, the smell alone would be enough to knock a bucket off a wagon. So, frankly, I'm surprised.
Why are you still in there after you see that? Get out of there and call the police.
These guys inspect abandoned buildings for a living, so I gotta believe at least one of them smelled a dead body before. Whatever the case, the moment what's-his-name stumbled across the half-melted cadaver, he should have stopped work immediately, grabbed his partner, and gone straight to the cops, as it's very likely this place is an unreported crime scene. At that point, any additional poking around that they do would only further contaminate or destroy evidence vital to the investigation, something which I'm sure a couple guys in their line of work would understand. Common sense aside, it's worth mentioning that, while they might not be aware of it, informing law enforcement about their discovery could potentially save a whole lot of lives that will otherwise be lost in the very near future. Yeah, Art and Victoria could absolutely bolt once they realize their hideout's been compromised. But if they don't, the ensuing police response might be enough to contain
smell that shit, bro.
Now, obviously, they won't send a SWAT team in just to check on a couple rotten stiffs. But between the detectives and the uniformed officers coming out to secure the scene, there would be more than enough armed bodies present to discourage any resistance. Remember, at the end of Terrifier 1, we learned that Art would rather take himself out of the equation than risk shooting it out with the 2 responding officers. This is what ultimately led to him escaping from the morgue at the beginning of the sequel. So, it makes sense for them to play dead and try to pull the same shtick. Only thing is, cops likely assumed Art's body was stolen from the morgue by some kind of accomplice or copycat. Meaning, this time around, there would hopefully...
Do anybody know, I'm assuming somebody gonna watch this, do anybody know how to put their chat from Twitch on OBS? That's the thing I want to know. Get back to it.
Be some security in place to prevent that from happening again. However, even if they still manage to escape, the news about Art's body being found only to once again disappear from police custody would almost certainly put people on edge, especially knowing what happened last time. If nothing else, this would make it significantly more difficult for Art and Victoria to move around in public, and it would also likely reduce the amount of people going out at night when they could easily be singled out. But unfortunately, instead of doing the right thing, our guy decides to scooch in extra close and snag a couple pictures.
Why you got that close to take a picture?
All while leaving the other man to unwittingly dig his own grave by venturing dangerously close to Art's rocking chair. It goes about how you'd expect.
Are you real?
Damn.
Yeah, if you have to ask whether the freakish life-size clown thing is real, you probably shouldn't get that close to it. Anyway, better cue up the soothing hamster footage, because things get gory fast. So right off the bat, it looks like Art's pretty hungry after his nap. But as luck would have it, his new best friend brought some finger sandwiches, which he seems more than happy to share. What a nice guy. Of course, Art, being the gracious host that he is, realizes the hard-working demo man could use some R&R. So just to make sure the dude stays off his feet, Art pins his hand to the ground with an 8-inch galvanized spike.
Am I tripping?
It's not over yet. Art pins his hand...
What? Bro, are them these balls? Why the motherfuckers so big? Man. What the fuck? Bruh.
Into the ground with an 8-inch galvanized spike. It's not over yet, though, as our friendly neighborhood slasher man takes note of his guest's severe discomfort and concludes it must be related to all that troublesome skin covering his face and neck. With that in mind, he borrows the box knife from the man's tool belt and proceeds to cut across the top of his scalp, freeing up just enough real estate to grab a hold and peel him like a banana. Now, it's worth mentioning here that the nail was driven through the meat of the victim's palm, meaning he could have potentially ripped it out through the webbing of his fingers and tried fighting back. Would that actually make a difference? Probably not. But just to be safe, Art should have driven the nail through his wrist, so the bones would help lock it in place. That being said, even if he somehow managed to break free, our guy would still have to fight his way through both Art and Victoria afterwards, and there's exactly zero chance of that going his way. Fact is, both of them were pretty much screwed the second they decided to take a closer look. In any case, it looks like mayhem's back on the menu for the citizens of Miles County, and there's no one who knows just how bad things can get better than Sienna Shaw. Having just checked herself out of the psych ward for the umpteenth time in the last 5 years, Sienna hops in the car with her Uncle Greg for an extended stay with him and his family. Gotta say, it's nice of them to take her in like this, but I'm gonna have to dock a few points from our protagonists for accepting their offer in the first place. Hear me out. So we know what Sienna went through with Art a few years ago didn't just happen in a vacuum. First, there was the precedent involving Victoria that was highly publicized, meaning it would have been a matter of public record that Art's body disappeared from the coroner's office afterwards. Couple that with the fact that Art's remains wouldn't have been found at the amusement park either, and there would be a couple different conclusions she could reasonably draw. The first is that Art can't be killed, and should, therefore, be considered alive and at large. This is supported by the fact that Sienna personally witnessed him shrugging off multiple life-ending injuries during their last encounter. However, the second possibility is that the Art that she ran into belongs to a fraternal organization of psychotic circus performers who carry out gruesome acts of violence under a single shared identity. After all, can she really be sure it was just the one evil clown she was squaring up with back in the amusement park? Maybe there were several of them, and they simply dragged off their dead and wounded to keep the ruse going. She did see the little demon child carry off his head at the end, so maybe a cleanup crew came by later on to waste the cop and snag the rest of him. Now, obviously, you and I know it's actually the first one, but Sienna does not. Still, in either case, it would be reasonable for her to assume that she's still in mortal danger. I mean, just look at what happened with Victoria. It can't be a coincidence that she went missing from the mental hospital on the same night as Art's most recent rampage. And while we saw back during the breakout scene that some kind of demonic interference was messing with the security cameras, there would still be plenty of evidence to suggest a lunatic with the same MO went in and paid her a visit. Knowing this, my first thought would be that Art makes it a priority to tie up loose ends, and considering Sienna's the only person we know of to ever actually defeat him, you gotta believe there's a big, fat bullseye sitting right on her forehead. Question is, why would she then decide to share that bullseye with the loving family members who took her into?
I can never remember how to perfectly format my citations.
Just click Get Citation, and you'll have a full citation
to their home. Sure, it'd be one thing if that home were a heavily armed survivalist compound surrounded by concrete walls and sea wire, but these people probably aren't even equipped to handle a burglar, much less the unstoppable human killing machine that is Art the Clown. Add in the fact that they don't even believe her story to begin with, and it's pretty much guaranteed they'll never see the hacksaws coming. And before you say that Sienna might have deliberately ignored any and all information pertaining to her case to spare herself the mental anguish of reliving it, we find out later that she had to stand trial for all of Art's murders following the events of Terrifier 2. Because of this, she would have been effectively forced to sit and listen as her story was retold in excruciating detail before the jury, including elements of it that she herself may not have even been aware of at the time. Anyway, were I in her shoes, the last thing I would want to do is endanger what little family I had left by staying under their roof. Instead, I would try to start my life over somewhere very, very far away, as quickly as possible. Naturally, money could be an issue since Sienna likely hasn't been able to hold down a job over the last few years, but the way I see it, she has a few options. First off, I would take inventory of everything I had at my disposal. It's possible that both Sienna and her brother Jonathan received some inheritance following their mother's death, and potentially even a life insurance payout provided she had a policy in place. Problem is, psych wards ain't cheap. We're talking thousands for a short-term stay if you're paying out of pocket. So there's a solid chance that any money Sienna had going in has been severely, if not entirely, depleted. Still, if it turns out she has a decent amount left over, then great. Buy a bus ticket, move across the country, get whatever job or jobs that you can find, and try to save up enough to either flee the US entirely or stockpile weapons somewhere off the grid. On the other hand, if Sienna's totally broke, she might try asking her aunt and uncle for a loan instead of a full-on room and board for an indefinite period of time. I mean, let's face it, either way, she's still taking their money, so why not spare them the headache and awkwardness of a long-term house guest with horrible PTSD and offer to pay them back as soon as you land on your feet? Now, if neither of those options are on the table, I have a couple long shots. Number one would be to join the military, preferably the Navy, where we could be out in the middle of the ocean for a while. But I would gladly settle for any arrangement that would let us stay in a secure area surrounded by armed guards at all times. Unfortunately for Sienna, her stints in the mental hospital, while voluntary, still technically make her disqualified. Although it is possible to obtain a waiver on a case-by-case basis following a military psych eval. I mean, they are supposedly hurting for recruits right now, so who knows? Maybe it'll work. However, if it doesn't, why not try prison? I won't go into details here, but suffice to say, it isn't too difficult to quickly run out and do something that'll get you locked up. Granted, yes, it's going to absolutely suck, but it's not like Art could casually walk into a women's prison without being noticed. Plus, depending on the offense, Sienna could potentially gain access to vocational training that might help her out on the other side. And finally, number 3 would be to fully embrace her minor celebrity status as a survivor of the Miles County Clown. Publish a book that ideally gets turned into a movie, and then start making the rounds on true crime podcasts to drive up sales and maximize profits. We find out later that both Sienna and her brother have garnered somewhat of an online following over the last few years, so there's definitely a market that she could exploit. And from there, she could take whatever money she earns in GTFO to somewhere expat friendly. Of course, as I'm sure many of you will point out, there's a ton of problems with this approach. For starters, it's going to take quite a while to both write and publish a book, and depending on the circumstance of her stay in the psych ward, it's possible that she wouldn't have had access to writing materials or a computer to even get started. This means she's going to have to fall back on one of the strategies we've already mentioned, to avoid staying with the family. Not to mention that all the publicity would almost certainly make it easier for Art to track her down. Hell, even Jonathan, who's been deliberately avoiding the spotlight, can't hide from it completely. Between strangers approaching him out in public and his roommate's girlfriend begging him to do her podcast, the poor guy's neck probably hurts from constantly looking over his shoulder. Lucky for him, he's got a solid out that Sienna doesn't: the French Foreign Legion. They only take men ages 17 to 39, but most importantly, they give you a whole new identity once you enlist, and after 3 years of service, you can make a formal request to obtain a French citizenship. This would allow him to completely disassociate from all the fanfare back home, while also hardening his once fragile frame into a trained killing machine. Now, there's a couple caveats here. The Legion requires a BMI between 18 and 30 at the time of enlistment, so he'd have to bulk up a little bit first. And while it's unclear just how blind Jonathan is without his prescription, his eyesight would have to fall within a certain range for him to qualify. That said, I was able to find photos of uniformed legionnaires wearing glasses, so he potentially still has a shot. Beyond that, the dude pretty much checks all the other boxes. All he'd have to do is buy a plane ticket to France and find the nearest recruitment center, and also pass selection, and not get killed fighting overseas. Whatever the case, I'd say trying out for the FFL would give him a much better chance of avoiding Art than attending college in the same town where they last saw each other, which is exactly what he's currently doing. Guess we'll see how that works out for him. Getting back to the story, We come to find out Art and Victoria woke up just a few days before Christmas, which is gonna make it a lot harder for them to walk around in public without being flagged by everyone around them. In fact, this is probably why Art's most recent massacres both took place during Halloween, when the abundance of fake blood and freaky costumes made it easy for him to blend in. Still, it doesn't exactly take a master of disguise to figure this one out. After all, clown makeup might be out of season right now, but who's gonna look twice at another jolly Saint Nick lugging around a bag full of goodies? And wouldn't you know it, there happens to be a perfectly good Santa costume hanging around on a nearby dive bar. It's just a matter of pulling it off the rack.
If Santa doesn't have a real beard, he's not a real Santa Claus.
Man, you're really gonna regret telling him that. Seriously though, the pair of geezers plopped down on the bar stools are far too nonchalant about talking to someone who looks like this. Once again, it's not Halloween, so the fact that he's dressed up like a notorious local serial killer should immediately be setting off red flags. I mean, it would be one thing if he were LARPing as Krampus or some kind of holiday-themed horror villain, but this guy picked a Miles County clown for a reason, probably because he's f***ed in the head. Whatever the case, the correct response here would be to create distance from this creep without aggravating him or isolating yourself. Easier said than done, sure, but even as little as going behind the bar would keep him out of arm's reach. Besides, the bartender seemed to be the only one who takes this clown seriously, so it'd probably be wise to have him close by in case we need backup. And yet, whether it's the booze or an overload of holiday spirit, Big Red decides he needs to offer up the full Santa experience because he is, and I quote, wearing the outfit. As if that means literally anything. Like, what are you worried about? Shattering his innocence? Dude's dressed up as a mass murderer, for Christ's sake. I'm not saying you have to smack him with a hammer just for walking up to you, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to revoke your slaying license just because you didn't let him sit on your lap. But of course, the kindly old impersonator does just that. And predictably, Art makes him regret it almost immediately. Granted, it wasn't in the way that you would probably expect for someone with Art's history, but all the same, it's enough for the bartender to finally decide enough is enough. Gotta admit, I'm surprised the guy was able to manhandle him so effectively without getting splattered. Unfortunately, he then makes the fatal mistake of returning Art's magic bag of tricks. And you know what that means.
I'm not gonna tell you again.
Yep, saw that coming. For real though, the freak just assaulted one of your customers. At that point, the priority should have been getting him out of the door as quickly as possible. Not only to keep him from doing anything else, but also to stop Kris Kringle and company from retaliating and potentially wrecking
your packages from your online selling channels, picked up from your warehouse.
Up the place. As for the bag, there was absolutely no need to return it right away. Just throw him out, lock the door, call the cops, and let them deal with it. Besides, the thing weighs like 100 pounds. No way he was just storing balloons in there. In fact, had the bartender been armed, he would have been totally justified in reaching for his firearm the moment he saw Art digging through his stash like that. After all, given the context, any reasonable person would assume he was searching for a weapon, especially with all the heavy metallic clanking sounds it was making. Now 2 men are dead, and a third's about to join them unless he can pull off a Christmas miracle. That said, Art does give him somewhat of a chance by closing in for the coup de grace. To quote John Correa, "At that distance, it's not your gun, it's not my gun, it's our gun." Which is to say, it would be possible, keyword possible, for Santa to make a play and potentially take control of it. Only problem is, Art's not an average person, meaning it's possible his reaction time is significantly faster than normal. Couple this with the fact that disarms are already a dice roll at best, and the odds aren't looking all that great for him. Of course, with that being said, what exactly does our guy have to lose? He just watched this maniac smoke 2 people over a shoving match. So one way or another, he's probably not walking out of this one. And besides, 124 grains to the dome doesn't seem all that bad compared to liquid nitrogen. Cool. So anyway, now that Art's got himself a bona fide Santa suit, what better place to take it for a spin than the local mall? However, just to be on the safe side, the killer clown decides to throw on a cheap plastic mask, which honestly might be creepier than his actual face. Still, while the getup might be enough to fool the average shopper, anyone who's ever had the misfortune of seeing Art up close could easily recognize him by his mannerisms alone. And sure enough, here comes Sienna to totally blow the lid off of his entire operation. Well, almost. You see, it turns out our protagonist has been seeing all sorts of things lately, and because of this, she can't quite be sure whether the art that she's seeing is the real deal or just another figment of her imagination. It probably wasn't such a great idea for her to go casually walking around town. If not for the risk of running into Art, then to avoid any of the true crime wackos out there that'll try and talk her ear off. And yeah, I realize she'd probably have to leave her aunt and uncle's house eventually, but remember, it's supposedly current year when all this takes place, which means that she could easily put on a ball cap and face mask before going out, and no one would hardly bat an eye. In any case, it seems the potential clown sighting is still concerning enough for her to bring it up with Jonathan when they see each other later on. However, it turns out somewhere along the line, little bro decided the best way to prepare for round 2 is to simply pretend it'll never happen. Guess that explains why he's not learning French right now. As for Sienna, she's not entirely convinced either, but just to err on the side of caution, she figures it might be time to revisit the old amusement park and dig up the magic sword that she used to beat Art back in Terrifier 2. Better safe than sorry, right? My only question is, why the f is it still there? Like, I get hiding it immediately after the fact to make sure that the cops didn't seize it as evidence, but the moment I heard Art's body was not recovered at the scene, I wouldn't be going more than 2 feet away from that thing for the rest of my natural life. Not to mention the fact that they left it in a rundown old funhouse that could have been easily demolished at any time. I mean, no fewer than 3 people died horribly in that dump. You don't think there'd be some serious public pressure to get rid of it? Hell, the place could be an IHOP by now. Also, I recognize it'd be difficult for Sienna to keep that thing in the psych ward, but that's fine. Just have Jonathan get it. Based on some of the letters that he sent, it's clear that he took the possibility of Art's return seriously at some point. But hey, credit where it's due. Sienna's finally being proactive. And while I still think that she and Jonathan should leave town immediately, at least now one of them has the means to hit Art where it hurts. One thing's for sure though, I'd be checking my rear view every 5 seconds on the ride back home. The last thing we need is an uninvited guest popping by when we least expect it. And I'm not talking about Cousin Eddie. Now, getting back to the mall, it seems old Satan Claus came there on a mission. And believe it or not, that mission is to treat all the good little boys and girls of Miles County to a Christmas that they'll never forget.
Hey, sorry for interrupting. Isn't that annoying? What if I told you there was a way to get rid of ads like this?
That's one way to deck or forget. That's one way to deck the halls. It's just too bad that most of the parents were too busy gawking at their phones to notice the absolute ghoul taking over Santa's throne. Then again, even the ones that did barely made any effort at all to wrangle up their brats, so it probably wouldn't have made much of a difference either way. Seriously though, there was no way in hell that I would let my kids stay anywhere near that freak show, let alone hold on to anything that they were given. I mean, God only knows where those toys have been. And even if they weren't packed full of Semtex H or whatever, who's to say the weirdo didn't slip a bunch of air tags on them? Oh well. The one minor silver lining in all this disaster is that the news coverage eventually makes its way to Sienna, all but outright confirming the art that she saw back in the mall wasn't a hallucination. Unfortunately, our hero reacts to this revelation in just about the worst way possible. Sure, I can understand freaking out a little bit, but popping a couple sleep aids and zonking out when you know that there's someone potentially coming to wipe out your entire family is beyond stupid. And just to make matters worse, Now, not only do her aunt and uncle not believe her, they also think she's starting to lose her grip on reality. So, that's great. Although, on the positive side, Greg agrees to go out and pick up Jonathan in the hopes that it'll help calm her down. Little do they realize, he's not the only one swinging by the campus tonight. Back across town, we join Art just as he's rolling up to a frat party. It is here that he overhears Jonathan's roommate, Cole, and his girlfriend, Mia, loudly discussing the prospects of landing an interview with the survivors of the Miles County Clown. But the way Art sees it, why settle for the victims when you could meet the maniac himself? After all, What's-Her-Name makes it pretty clear that she's looking for the full experience.
What does he smell like? Is there a soul?
Oh boy. Well, you all know the drill. Baby animals, me explaining. Cause this part's about to get steamy. Now, before we get into it, it's worth mentioning that Art might be a violent, murdering psychopath, but he's not a block, okay? So when he creeps up on the aforementioned couple getting busy in the shower stall, he's not doing it to spoil their good time. Nah, instead, he just wants to give his #1 fan the kind of up-close and personal encounter that she'll never forget. And of course, there's no better way to leave a lasting impression than with a chainsaw. However, in all of Art's excitement to deliver the goods, he fails to notice the wet tile in front of the shower door, causing him to slip and drive the blades directly through Cole's outstretched wrist, and also his fingers, and now his leg. Actually, if I didn't know better, I would say Art was deliberately trying to kill these people, but we'll just have to give him the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, now that Cole's leg just snapped in half like a toothpick, Mia finally gets to have the one-on-one that she's been waiting for. But whether it's the shock of meeting her hero or the sight of her boyfriend flopping around in his own blood, the ambitious young podcaster simply can't think of anything to ask. Sadly, before she has a chance to collect herself, the old slippery floor strikes again, this time causing Art to lose his balance and knock her down a cup size. The bumbling clown then tries to make another pass and even them out, but in his haste he misses completely and drags the blade across her stomach. That's okay though, Dr. Art can fix anything. For you see, just like Michelangelo, he sees the angel inside the marble and merely has to carve away until it's free. All it takes is a few cuts here, a slash across her scalp, and maybe a couple more to her face and arms, and presto. Oh, wait, she's dead. Huh. Well, better finish off the other one then. After all, it would be cruel to keep them apart. Realizing this, Art stops the fleeing Cole with an interrectal chainsaw exam before flipping him over and slicing him right down the middle. So
Oh, hello? Yo.
So, yeah, that was
chat.
fun.
Can you hear me?
Also, if you're
Oh, there you go. Damn, I wonder how long it was like that. I look stupid as fuck.
If you're wondering what the survival strats are here,
I don't know if you heard me. I said
there really aren't too many.
You,
in fact,
you
the
old
only real
now.
chance they had was at the beginning of the attack, when Cole managed to grab a hold of the chainsaw's motor case and briefly keep it at bay. Just like at the bar, maintaining control over the opponent's weapon is absolutely critical. And in this case, had Mia joined in, they might have been able to push Art back using their combined effort and make a run for the bathroom door. Problem is, they wouldn't have had much traction moving barefoot over wet tile. And
what
with
they
Art's
did?
superior strength,
what they
solid
link
grasp
is?
of
I don't
want to
click that link. What is that? I don't what that link is. I don't want to know. Car accidents. You want me to react to that? You want me to react to car accident? I love cars and trucks. I don't know. Can I even watch that on Twitch? Especially when they crash. Hell. What the hell wrong with you? I don't think I can watch that on Twitch. Yes, you're allowed. Just if you don't see blood on people. Let me finish this first. It's almost over. It got about a couple more minutes, 15 more minutes. Whatever.
Wouldn't have been too difficult for him to rip it away and re-engage. In reality, sometimes
you ever watch Terrifier?
And regardless of
I watched
whether they
one and like
so you think you know Wix?
Damn,
do you really?
First
First up, we've got Shake Video.
Getting it on in there or not, the shower is one of those times. I mean, it's loud, your hands are wet, the floor is slippery, and there's no room to maneuver. You're basically a sitting duck. Sure, you could ziplock a 45 auto and stash it behind the body wash, but this is a communal bathroom, so there's only so much control that you can exercise over the environment. Also, yes, I can see how it might be kind of foolish to hook up in the shower during a party, but remember, Cole and Mia had no idea that they were in danger, meaning as far as they knew, the most that they were risking was the embarrassment of someone walking in and eavesdropping. And speaking of eavesdropping, we jump back to Sienna just as the medication wears off, rendering her lucid enough to overhear Uncle Greg and Aunt Jess talking down in the kitchen. What's strange is that, despite several hours likely having passed, it doesn't sound like Jonathan's down there with him. And considering we can see that she hasn't received any messages that might show that he changed his mind, one would think that Uncle Greg should have already gone and picked him up. However, what's even stranger is what they're talking about. Turns out Greg and Jess aren't simply annoyed with their niece's behavior. They're straight up planning to kill her over it.
What?
Because that'll be so much easier than asking her to just leave. Still, given Sienna's history of both visual and auditory hallucinations, this could easily be another case of her mind playing tricks on her. So, it certainly makes sense for her to sneak in to make sure before stabbing them both in their sleep. Based on her findings, the good news is that Greg and Jess aren't actually planning her untimely demise. The bad news is that someone else definitely is.
Oh, hell no.
Well, that sucks. Nothing to do now but hightail it back to the power sword and give these freaks what for. Oh, except instead of stashing it somewhere even remotely accessible, our hero decided it was better to leave her only viable weapon wrapped up under the tree where it's totally useless. But
why the fuck she put it under the tree?
Were you expecting Art to come sliding down the chimney on Christmas morning?
Why not sleep with it next to you?
After seeing the news broadcast from the mall, I'd have that thing taped to my back like John McClane. And hell, even if she had just stuck it under her mattress or something, she still would have had a chance to retrieve it after kicking Art against the wall.
You got the only weapon to help you.
Just had to get
and you
creative
put it under the tree, behind the tree. Not in the front where you can just grab that bitch. Behind that bitch, you gotta reach back there and
find out what Art and Victoria brought them for Christmas. Surprise! It's a freshly peeled human skull, and since Greg's severed noggin is currently topping Old Tannenbaum, the only other person that it can belong to is Sienna's little cousin Gabby. Whatever the case, it seems Aunt Jess ain't buying it, but unfortunately for her, she'll never get a chance to find out. You see, it turns out the odd couple brought one more gift for everyone to enjoy. A plastic tube? Yep, let's get some stock footage up on the screen real quick, because I got a feeling this is not going to be pretty. There we go. Anyway, it seems Art and Victoria are concerned that Jess might be suffering from some kind of severe allergic reaction right now. So just to make sure her airway stays open, they gently force the plastic tube down her throat before securing it in place with a wooden mallet. There, that ought to do it. Oh wait, no, it looks like they're losing her. Luckily, Art brought along some medically trained rats that he can insert to fix her up from inside out. All they need is a few seconds to sort out the issue, and Aunt Jess will be good as new. Yep, okay, she stopped struggling, so I think they must have found the problem. Time to carve our little heroes an exit path through the patient's trachea and see if her condition improves. It appears that it did not. What a shame. Still, I'm sure the rat doctors did their very best. Fact is, there's only so much cutting-edge medical science can do to save someone's life. Also, it's worth mentioning here that Sienna could have potentially slipped her restraints during the procedure, as there were several points throughout where both Art and Victoria were suitably distracted. As mentioned in our video on Terrifier 1, it's possible to break free from duct-taped armrests by rapidly bringing each arm towards the center of your chest, almost like you're trying to punch yourself. From there, she'd just have to rip the tape away from her ankles and then make a break for the soda box before they turned around. Sure, it's probably a lot more difficult than it sounds, but the moment Art and Victoria can give Sienna their full attention, she is screwed. So I'd say it's definitely worth a try. However, before they get around to wrapping things up, Victoria decides to turn up the torture even further by revealing that the skull on the table isn't Gabby's after all. It's Jonathan's. This is paired with Art dragging in the real Gabby for a surprise family reunion. At which point, the plan is to apparently make the girl watch as her only possible savior is forcibly turned to the dark side. Of course, what the diabolical duo fails to realize is that Sienna's pack and plot armor is thick as the Kool-Aid Man, allowing her to shrug off the indoctrination attempt without any trouble. It's not over yet, though, as the crusty creeps determine it must be young Gabby's presence convincing her to hold on. And so with that in mind, Art grabs a kitchen knife and sits the child down for a Yuletide decapitation. Now, I've got to admit, at this point, there's really nothing I can think of that would get us out of the situation. If Sienna tried to break free, Art and Victoria would immediately pounce on her, and there's no way in hell Gabby's gonna be getting out on her own. That said, when faced with certain death, there's no such thing as a crazy idea. And wouldn't you know it, little Cuz has been holding on to a Hail Mary play for just such an occasion. You see, it turns out the runt has a habit of sneaking peeks at her presence, and in doing so, she went through the box that Sienna wrapped up and found the magic sword. With that in mind, Gabby laments the fact that she won't be able to open any of her gifts before going lights out, and by some absolute miracle of character inconsistency, Victoria actually agrees to let Sienna open it up for her. Granted, yes, it's not like Greg would have boxed up a loaded Desert Eagle for his preteen daughter, but still, since when has Team Art ever shown anyone even the slightest bit of compassion? I mean, if anything, I'd expect them to say, "Too bad," before popping out one of her eyeballs. But I guess the spirit of giving can find its way even to the iciest of hearts. Still, this isn't quite the layup that they were hoping for, as just to play it safe, Art makes it a point to shatter Sienna's wrists before she digs in. Even so, we know from Terrifier 2 that the sword gives her the ability to immediately recover from any and all wounds.
What kind of sword is this?
Christmas story is about to get good.
Best gift ever.
What the fuck is this?
So, now that Icky Vicky's head is rolling across the floor, Sienna and Gabby are finally free to hug it out amidst the absolute bloodbath that was once their living room. Except not really, because Art's body still hasn't been dissolved in acid and poured down a mine shaft. And sure enough, the Clown Prince of Pain comes charging in with his chainsaw raised for a final attack. This results in a Gears of War 2-esque duel to the death that ultimately goes to the ground once both parties are disarmed. At the same time, it seems Gabby's decided to stop helping entirely and is instead committed to screaming at her clearly deceased mother while Sienna's barely hanging on by a thread.
God.
I mean, literally, all she has to do is pick up the
sword
sword and either
start
use it
stabbing
herself
this nigga.
or give it back to her cousin. But hey, let's not worry about the fact that Art's gonna pull you apart like Play-Doh the first chance he gets. I'm sure it'll all work out just fine. Thankfully, Sienna manages to fight her way back to the blade in time to run it through Art's gizzard. But before she can strike the killing blow, a gateway to hell opens up from the pool of Victoria's blood and nearly swallows Gabby whole. Which, by the way, totally wouldn't have happened if she'd kept trying to help. Just saying. Anyway, it's at this point that Sienna must
so much shit happening.
Her only relative.
I thought Terrifier was like street level shit.
Only, how is this actually a decision? Look. This is 100% one of those secure your own oxygen mask first type of situations. Yes, if Sienna doesn't act quickly, Gabby might die. But you can bet if she doesn't take this clown out now, he's just gonna get back up and kill the both of them. Probably by throwing them in. And besides, it's not like she has to cut him apart with scissors or something. It's just a matter of pulling the sword out and hacking his head off. The whole process will take like 3 seconds tops. Meanwhile, Gabby's shown she's strong enough to hang on for a bit, so I'm sure the extra delay won't make that much of a difference. But alas, Sienna decides to drop everything and go in for the save. And to do this, she lowers her magic sword, the only thing known to be capable of defeating Art, down into the abyss while holding it by the blade. Like, I get she doesn't have all the time in the world here, but don't you think there might be a few other less important items nearby that she could use for this? I don't know. Why not try the
main
Christmas
characters
tree? It'd be much easier for the both of them to hold on to. And if she loses it, well, Christmas is already ruined anyway. But oh well. Let's just see how it works out for them. Not very well. And with that, Sienna is left with nothing but the knowledge that she could have done better. As for Art, he chose to get away while the getting was good, rather than risk another round with our hero. So, at least there's that.
The last couple of minutes of this shit
was
so
and neither has Sienna. In the end,
the little girl could pick a sword and help her, and she damn sure shouldn't let that sword go.
And while many of the deaths might have been entirely unavoidable, I'm highly confident that our strategies could have saved multiple lives. Moreover, had Sienna opted to keep her sword handy instead of stashing it under the tree, she very likely could have defeated Art and Victoria as soon as she found them inside the house, thereby saving both Gabby and
what she fucked up
for that reason.
Putting the damn
Terrifier 3
putting the damn sword under the tree.
Moral of the story: you can't.
Why are you putting the sword under the tree wrapped up?
Also, I had a lot of fun with this one.
That
so if you've got the stomach for it, be sure to show the creators some support and give the film a watch.
W video, but that ending stuff. Like, nah. More how to beat video, but yeah, that's the end of the video. Make sure you follow me on Twitch and YouTube at JustT148. And let me know in the comment what you think about Terrifier. And also, should I change my name to JustT148 Live on YouTube? So that I'm posting live stuff. I don't know. I'll figure it out.